It started with a voice, not loud, not even particularly forceful, but sharp, elegant, too elegant for a janitor's uniform. That's what stopped Richard Vance in his tracks that Monday morning. He'd been halfway across the lobby, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other, head already buried in the weight of the week when he heard it. Mandarin. Perfect. Textbook Mandarin. But more than that, it had the ease of someone who lived the language, not just learned it. For a split second, he thought it was someone from the Beijing division, maybe one of the visiting execs he hadn't been briefed on. But then he spotted her. Marla. Her name tag, worn and scratched, sat crooked on a faded polo shirt. She was standing near the touchscreen building directory, mop leaning against the wall beside her, speaking fluidly with an older Chinese couple who looked simultaneously overwhelmed and grateful. She didn't fumble, didn't pause. She pointed gently toward the elevator bank while explaining in perfect Mandarin which offices were on which floors and where they needed to go. Her tone was warm, friendly, patient. She didn't look like she was trying to impress anyone. She just helped. Richard blinked. Was he seeing this right? This woman. He'd seen her before, hadn't he? On late nights, maybe in the hallway by the finance wing. Always quiet, always gone by morning. He stepped a little closer, enough to hear more clearly. By now, the couple had nodded their thanks, bowing slightly, and Marla responded with a phrase so natural, so regionally accurate, Richard wouldn't have been surprised if she'd grown up in Shanghai. As the couple walked off, a delivery worker approached with a clipboard and a confused look. No badge, no English, clearly not sure where to go. Without hesitation, Marla turned and addressed him in Spanish. Again, fluent, smooth, second nature. The man's expression eased instantly. A few words exchanged, a short laugh. Then he was on his way. Richard just stared. But it didn't stop there. Barely a heartbeat later, a third person approached. Someone from vendor logistics, arms full of packages, looking completely lost. Labels in French. Marla didn't miss a beat. She slipped into French like she'd been speaking it all day, directed him clearly, no hesitations, no accent. Richard could barely keep up with what was happening. One woman, 3 conversations, 3 different languages, all within the space of 30 seconds. And none of it felt forced. The weight of it began to sink in. How many people walked past her every day without ever wondering what else she was capable of? How many meetings had been held in this very building discussing international strategy, language diversity, global partnerships, and yet, right here in the lobby, the most versatile linguist in the company was wearing rubber gloves and non-slip shoes. Richard stood there, shoes planted to the tile, his mind racing to catch up with what his eyes had just witnessed. This wasn't just surprising, it was staggering. Not because of what she knew, but because no one had thought to ask. He'd been CEO for 7 years, seen hundreds of resumes, conducted high-level interviews across 3 continents, spent thousands on consultants and interpreters and external hires, but somehow, in his own building, on his own payroll, the most brilliant communicator he'd encountered wasn't sitting in a corner office. She was holding a mop. He hesitated for a second before walking over. There was no script for this moment. CEOs didn't usually stop mid-lobby to strike up conversation with janitorial staff, but something about her composure, the way she handled those 3 conversations like they were nothing more than breathing, pushed him past that invisible line. "Excuse me," he said quietly. She turned toward him, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Not fear, but a sort of cautious alertness, the kind that comes from years of not being noticed until something goes wrong. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice measured, polite, still calm. He smiled faintly, trying not to make it feel like an interrogation. "That was Mandarin, right?" She nodded. "And Spanish, and French." He raised his eyebrows. "Fluent in all 3?" Another nod. Then, as if she were stating the weather, "Also Portuguese, German, Arabic, Italian, and Swahili. I read Latin too, but I don't usually count that." Her tone was casual, not defensive. There was no ego. No need to explain, just facts, the kind that made his next words feel embarrassingly overdue. "You speak 9 languages?" She gave a small shrug. "I do." Richard stood there for a beat too long, his mind recalculating everything. The world didn't tilt on its axis, but it certainly paused. "What's your name?" he asked. "Marla Benton," she replied. "Miss Benton, are you free for a few minutes?" Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Right now?" "Yes," he said, stepping toward the elevator. "I'd like to talk to you in my office." She didn't move at first, not out of resistance but calculation, like she was trying to determine if this was real or if she was about to be reprimanded for doing too much. You could see the years behind her eyes, years of keeping her head down, of being seen only as the uniform and not the person in it. But then she nodded, wiped her palms on her work pants and followed him toward the elevators. As they waited, a few people glanced over, curious, confused. Richard didn't explain. He just stepped inside, holding the door open. They rode in silence for a few floors before Marla spoke, softly. "Been working here 12 years, she said. "Didn't think I'd ever go past 10. Richard looked over. "Why not?" "Most people don't invite the janitor up." She smiled, but there wasn't bitterness in her voice, just truth. He nodded. "You'd be surprised how quickly things can change." She didn't reply, but he could tell she was thinking, calculating, not getting her hopes up, not yet, but keeping the door open a crack. When they stepped off the elevator, the air shifted. It always did up here. Cooler, quieter, expensive. Marla walked slowly, eyes scanning everything but never lingering. The leather chairs, the art, the scent of citrus polish and something he could only describe as money. She didn't look intimidated, just alert. Richard's assistant stared as they passed but said nothing. Inside his corner office, he gestured to a seat. She sat carefully, folding her hands in her lap like she didn't quite trust the furniture to welcome her. He sat across from her, leaned forward slightly. "I'll be honest," he said. "I didn't plan to have this conversation today." "Neither did I," she replied. There was the faintest curve of amusement on her lips. "But I just heard you switch between 3 languages like flipping a switch. I need to understand something." She waited. He took a breath. "How does someone like you end up here? Cleaning floors?" The question wasn't meant to offend, and she didn't take it that way. But she did take a moment. She glanced out the window, then back at him. "You want the truth?" He nodded. Wouldn't have asked otherwise. She rubbed her hands together, warming up words that had been sitting in silence for too long. "Born in Akron, Ohio, only child. My dad was a welder, mum was a nursing aide. Didn't have much, but they pushed education like it was oxygen. I loved languages from the start. Got a full ride to Ohio State, studied linguistics, was halfway through a master's in computational translation when my mum got sick. I came home to take care of her. Thought it would be a semester off, but she didn't get better." She paused. Her voice wasn't shaky, just steady, unadorned. "Then my dad had a stroke. 6 months later. That kind of loss. It doesn't leave room for tuition payments or dreams. I took work wherever I could. Grocery store clerk, cafeteria line cook. Eventually got offered a custodial job here. Nights, mostly. It paid steady. Let me pick my daughter up from school. Paid the gas, the lights. That's what mattered." Richard was silent. Not the kind of silence people use to fill awkward gaps, but the kind that signaled respect. He didn't interrupt. Just let her speak. "But I never stopped learning," she continued. "Language was mine. I borrowed books, listened to recordings, practiced with international nurses at the clinic my mum used to go to, read newspapers in 6 languages just to keep my brain alive. It's the only thing that still made me feel like I mattered, like I hadn't disappeared." She looked straight at him. Most people saw the mop and figured the mind attached to it wasn't worth much. Her words landed with weight. No self-pity, no begging. Just reality, polished from use. Richard leaned back slowly, the enormity of her story and what the company had been blind to, settling heavily into his chest. The day moved forward, but Richard's mind didn't. Not really. The rest of his meetings blurred together. Supply chain numbers, client feedback, another pitch about vendor consolidation. But his thoughts kept circling back to that moment in the lobby. The way Marla had moved so effortlessly between conversations, not just translating words but shifting entire interactions. There was a fluidity to her, a grace he hadn't seen in the boardroom in years. And it gnawed at him. The idea that someone that gifted had been working quietly under their noses, unnoticed for over a decade. By 3:30, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He left his office mid-sentence, cutting short a conversation with the director of operations, and rode the elevator back down, this time not to the lobby, but to the service level. The elevator doors opened to an entirely different world. Warmer air, fluorescent lights, the scent of industrial soap. He passed rows of stacked paper towels, floor buffer machines, carts filled with cleaning supplies. Most executives never came down here. He'd never had a reason to before, until now. He found her in a storage room, restocking microfiber cloths on a steel rack. Her back was to him, but she turned slightly at the sound of footsteps. There was a flash of surprise in her eyes. "Mr. Vance," she said, brushing dust from her hands. "I didn't expect you to—" "Hope I'm not interrupting," he cut in. "Mind if I ask another favor?" She blinked. "That depends." "What kind of favor?" He stepped into the room, lowered his voice. "We've got a team from São Paulo upstairs. They came early. Translator bailed. Can you step in?" There was only a split-second pause. "Portuguese?" she asked. "I can do that." No theatrics, no hesitation. Just a quiet yes. 10 minutes later, she walked into conference room 4C. 4 executives from Brazil sat around the table, visibly tense. They were polite but guarded, fiddling with their phones, unsure whether to speak or wait. Then Marla entered, nodded once, and greeted them, in perfect flowing Portuguese. The change was immediate, shoulders relaxed, faces lit up. One of them cracked a joke and she responded with another, drawing out genuine laughter. She wasn't just bridging a gap, she was erasing it, making people feel comfortable, human, understood. Richard watched from the back of the room as things unfolded. He didn't catch every word, but he didn't need to. What he saw was fluency, not just in language, but in presence. She wasn't performing. She belonged. After 25 minutes, the meeting wrapped. Everyone looked more energized than when they'd entered. One of the Brazilian execs turned to Richard, speaking in clear English. "She's better than any interpreter we've worked with this year," he said. "Where did you find her?" Richard glanced at Marla, who was quietly collecting empty coffee cups. "Right here," he replied. On the way out, he caught up with her in the hallway. "You ever done that professionally before?" he asked. She shook her head. "Nope, just helped out here and there. Hospitals, schools, the DMV once." "You have certification?" "No time," she said simply. "My daughter needed me more." He nodded. "Where is she now?" 26, a nurse, paid her way through school. Wouldn't take help from me even if I offered. Got that from me, I guess. They walked in silence for a moment. For once, it didn't feel like CEO and employee, just 2 people walking through a building full of invisible lines. She clocked back in and disappeared down the hallway to finish her shift. But just before she turned the corner, she looked back. "I didn't do anything special today," she said. Richard raised an eyebrow. "That's not how it looked to me." She gave him a faint smile and vanished around the corner. That night, Richard sat in his car in the garage for almost 20 minutes before turning the ignition. He thought about the long talks they'd had about diversity, about inclusion, about untapped talent, all the workshops, the consultants, the hiring initiatives. And here was this woman, right under their roof the whole time. No job posting, no polished resume, just brilliance, hidden by a name tag and late-night hours. It made him wonder how many more they'd overlooked. The next morning, Marla had just finished wiping down the elevators when her supervisor found her. "Hey," he said awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. Mr. Vance asked to see you, again." Her first instinct was worry. "Did I mess up?" "Didn't say that. Just told me to send you up." She washed her hands, took a breath, and followed the same path as yesterday. Only this time, people were watching, not just glancing, watching. She felt the shift before she even reached the elevator. People whispering, pausing mid-sentence. A couple of nods. One of the receptionists gave her a small smile, the kind that said, "I know something's up, even if I don't know what." When she arrived on the top floor, Richard was by the window sipping coffee. "Come in," he said without turning around. She stepped in quietly, waiting. After a pause, he set his mug down and faced her. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how much talent gets overlooked. How many people never get a shot, not because they're not qualified, but because no one looks twice." Marla said nothing. She didn't trust easy praise. She'd seen people talk big and act small. "I want to offer you a new position," he said. "One that doesn't exist yet. One I think this company desperately needs." She tilted her head slightly, cautious. "Doing what?" "Cultural liaison, international affairs. Someone who can manage communications, visitors, documentation, basically everything we keep tripping over." Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "You're qualified," he said. "Frankly, more than most of the people in leadership." She studied him carefully. "Is this real?" "As real as it gets." "I don't have a degree," she said, almost as if testing him. "You've got something better. Lived experience, dedication, mastery, 9 languages. That's not just skill. That's discipline. That's strategy. That's global thinking." She shifted her stance, still unsure. "Why me?" He looked her in the eye. "Because I saw you solve 3 problems in 3 languages before 9 a.m. yesterday. Because I'm tired of walking past brilliance and calling it background." She crossed her arms. "You know people are going to talk." "They already are," he said. "And I don't care." She let the words settle, let the silence stretch long enough to make sure she wasn't dreaming. "I've never had an office job," she said. "Never had a title. You'll learn fast. I don't have a wardrobe for this kind of thing. I'll have HR send you a stipend." She chuckled. Not out of amusement, but disbelief. "You really thought this through?" "I'm trying." She paused again, then looked him dead in the eye. "What about my shift downstairs? Who replaces me?" "We'll find someone," he said. "But no one can replace you." Neither of them said much after that. She looked down at her hands, then up at the skyline, still trying to picture herself on the other side of that glass, still trying to believe that the world had finally turned her way. And when she finally said, "All right then, let's see what I can do," it didn't sound like acceptance. It sounded like a warning, because once Marla Benton stepped into that office, nothing was going to be the same again. By Wednesday morning, the entire building knew. They didn't have the full story, of course, but word travels differently in an office. Not in memos or meetings, but through glances, whispers, half-finished Slack messages, and awkward elevator small talk. People knew that Marla, the janitor, was no longer mopping floors, that she'd been upstairs, had a meeting with the CEO, and now had a new badge, a new office, a new title. Most didn't even know what that title was, just that something had shifted and not everyone was clapping. The marketing team was among the first to break the silence out loud. 2 assistants, both less than 3 years out of grad school, sat in the lounge, picking over salads and simmering curiosity. "You hear about that janitor lady?" one said, not even trying to lower her voice. "She's like some executive now." The other nodded. "Yeah, cultural something. Apparently speaks a bunch of languages." The first one scoffed. "So do I. I've got a master's in international business. I've been here 2 years and haven't moved an inch. But she gets promoted overnight." Her tone said what she didn't. Unfair, unqualified, unbelievable. In another corner of the building, an older account executive muttered under his breath during a meeting, "Whole thing feels like a PR stunt." Someone else chimed in, "It's Vance trying to look woke." And someone else said nothing at all, just gave a tight smile and went back to typing. But even silence says something. Marla felt it the moment she stepped onto the 12th floor. The looks. The way conversations stopped when she passed. How people glanced at her nameplate, then at her, like they were trying to spot the mistake. She didn't respond, didn't flinch. She had spent years learning how to walk into rooms that didn't expect her. This was just a different version of the same test. Her office was modest, just a desk, a monitor, a small window, and a leafy plant someone had left behind. But to her, it looked like another planet. She sat for a long time on her first day, not touching anything, just letting it sink in. HR had finished onboarding, handed her a company laptop, and asked if she needed anything. She said yes, her old uniform. Not to wear, just to keep. A reminder. Her first real meeting came at 3 p.m. Victor Park, the company's director of international operations, walked in with a clipboard and a storm cloud on his face. No handshake, no introduction, just a tight nod. "So, you're the new liaison?" he said, like the words left a bad taste. "That's what I'm told," she replied calmly. He sat down across from her, flipping open the folder like it was a challenge. "I've got documents from Italy, a report from Dubai, and a mess of invoices from São Paulo. We've got a vendor problem. Legal's dragging. Can you handle it?" She didn't hesitate. "I'll need a few hours to review, but yes." He didn't thank her, just left the folder on her desk and walked out, already halfway through an email by the time the door closed. She stared at the papers for a minute, then began reading. By 6 o'clock, she'd already flagged translation inconsistencies in the Italian contract, identified the root of the São Paulo delay, and rewritten 2 vendor letters in clear, formal Portuguese. She didn't wait for approval. She just sent them. Later that night, Richard stopped by her office. He leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, the way people do when they don't want to spook something powerful. "How's day 1?" he asked. She leaned back in her chair, brushing hair from her face. "I've had worse." He grinned. "Victor give you trouble?" "He doesn't scare me." "I figured." She paused for a beat, then looked at him. "Can I ask something?" "Of course." "Why me? You could have handed me a bonus, sent a thank you email, then moved on. Why go this far?" He stepped inside and sat across from her. "Because I saw myself in you," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You were a janitor." "But I was broke, invisible, worked 3 jobs to get through college. People told me I didn't belong in rooms like this, and now I get to decide who does. So I saw someone working 10 times harder for 1/10 the credit, and I figured it was time someone saw you for real." She looked down at the folder on her desk, then back at him. "I'll be honest," she said. "I'm nervous." "Good," he replied. "Means you give a damn. There are going to be people who hate this." "They'll get over it," he said. "Or they won't. Either way, we're moving forward." The next morning, Richard made a decision. He renamed the company's main training room. No big speech, no press release. Just quietly replaced the old plaque with a new one, the Atwater Room. A nod to her, a symbol. Not for the suits, for the staff, for the ones walking in every day believing no one saw them. It was a message. Greatness can come from anywhere, and you don't have to look up to find it. By the end of that week, something had shifted. Marla wasn't just the new liaison. She was the reason people started thinking differently. She wasn't loud about it. She didn't make speeches. But little by little, people started coming to her, not just with language questions, but ideas, concerns, things they never brought to execs before. She listened, she responded, she made space. And for the first time in a long time, the company started feeling less like a hierarchy and more like a team. The plaque on the door was simple, brushed steel, black lettering. The Atwater Room. No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no speeches, no mass email celebrating the decision. Just a quiet change, made overnight, that said more than 1,000 press releases ever could. It was the room where every new employee went through orientation, where mid-level managers took leadership workshops, where interns gave their first presentations and HR hosted compliance briefings. Now it carried her name, not because she asked for it, not because someone wanted a feel-good moment, but because Richard Vance wanted everyone who walked through that door to know exactly what the company valued. And more importantly, who it had failed to see for far too long. It wasn't just symbolic, it was a shift. The kind you could feel in the hallway, in the way people glanced at the door now. The way they lingered before walking in, pausing to read her name like it might offer a clue about what kind of company this really was. And not everyone understood it. But those who did, those who'd ever worked jobs with invisible titles and endless ceilings, they saw it for what it was: a reclamation, a declaration. That same afternoon, Richard stood just outside the Atwater room as a group of new hires filtered in. They looked young, eager, unsure of what to expect. One of them pointed at the door. "Who's that?" he whispered. A senior staff member beside him smiled slightly. "She's someone who reminded this place that greatness doesn't always come in a suit." Upstairs, in her modest corner office, Marla found a small envelope resting neatly on her desk. No return address, just her name, handwritten in careful block letters. She opened it slowly, uncertain what she'd find. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No header, no signature, just a short note. "I used to think I'd be invisible forever, but today I stood a little taller because of you. Thank you, no name, no title." But the message hit her harder than anything else that week. Proof that people were watching, that her presence wasn't just noticed, it was needed. She held the note for a long time before folding it carefully and placing it in her top drawer beside her ID badge. Not the new one, the old one. The one she used to swipe in at 10 p.m, mop in hand, headphones tucked under a headscarf, wondering if anyone even knew her name. She didn't keep it as a trophy. She kept it to remember, to remind herself how far she had come and how many others were still waiting to be seen. But not everyone was celebrating. The quiet murmur of resentment hadn't disappeared. It had just gone upstairs. Late that week, Marla was called to a meeting. But this time, it wasn't with Richard. It was with Eleanor Craig, a board member who rarely stepped foot outside of Dallas unless there was trouble. Eleanor had been with the company since the late 90s, known for her polished demeanor, clipped sentences, and a Rolodex of industry contacts that could swing a quarter's profit with a single call. When Marla walked into the small conference room on the 17th floor, Eleanor didn't look up. She was shuffling papers. A thick file sat in front of her. Marla's name was printed across the tab in bold black ink. "Have a seat," Eleanor said without looking up. Marla did. A long pause, then 2 taps of a pen. "So, Miss Atwater, I've reviewed your file. No college degree, no corporate training, no certifications. Is that correct?" Marla met her gaze. "That's correct. You were working in janitorial services as recently as last month." "I was. Help me understand," Eleanor said, folding her hands. "How someone with your background is now managing international communications and vendor relations for a global corporation." Marla didn't blink. "Because I speak 9 languages, because I understand cross-cultural nuance, because I've already fixed 2 vendor contracts that legal had sitting in limbo for 3 months, because I cleared a delay with our Morocco deal in 48 hours, and because last week I secured a verbal agreement with our Brazilian partners that we've been chasing for half a year." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "You think this company should be run on instinct and charm?" Marla tilted her head slightly. "No, ma'am. I think it should be run on results." That was the first time Eleanor paused, really paused. "I don't need to be liked," Marla continued. "I just need to be useful. And I am." There was silence again. Then Eleanor stood and slowly closed the folder. "You're a gamble," she said. "I'm used to that," Marla replied. "My whole life's been one." After the meeting, Marla didn't go back to her office right away. She left the building and sat on a bench across the street, staring up at the glass tower that had once seemed so far away. For years she had walked past it at sunset, heading into a shift most people never saw. She remembered those nights, carrying supplies, fixing vending machines, wiping down whiteboards in rooms filled with million-dollar strategies written by people who never learned her name. She used to wonder if anyone inside ever thought about the people scrubbing their fingerprints from the glass. Now she was inside, and they were still trying to figure out what to do with her. She pulled out her phone and called her daughter. "Hey, Ma," came the voice on the other end. "Everything okay?" Marla didn't answer right away, just listened to the sound of her daughter breathing, the sound of something stable, real. "Yeah," she said finally. "Just needed to hear your voice." They talked about groceries, a new movie, the dog. It wasn't a long call, but it was enough. Enough to remind her who she was doing this for, and why quitting wasn't an option. The next morning, people expected her to retreat, to keep quiet, maybe even quit. But instead, Marla showed up early. She led a meeting with the German office entirely in fluent, formal German. Answered questions, clarified documents, cracked a joke that made 3 managers laugh out loud. That afternoon, someone wrote 3 words on the whiteboard outside her office. No signature, just a message. "We see you." And from that moment, the tide began to turn. People started coming to her, not just for translations or advice, but for trust. Junior staffers, interns, managers who had questions they were too embarrassed to ask in front of peers. She sat with them, listened, guided without preaching, encouraged without patronizing. She wasn't just a liaison anymore. She was becoming something else entirely, a touchstone, a compass. One day, a shy Vietnamese intern named Bao lingered by her office. "How did you learn all those languages?" he asked. Marla smiled. "One word at a time," she said. "Same way you will." She didn't try to change the culture with a loud bang. She changed it with consistency, with presence, by showing up every day as herself and refusing to shrink. Weeks later, over coffee in the break room, Richard leaned over and said, "I've been thinking, we need a program, for people like you, for the ones working jobs nobody notices. There are more Marlas in this building." She nodded. "There are. They're just not being seen yet." He looked at her. "Want to help me build it?" She didn't hesitate. "Already started in my head." By the end of the month, the program launched. It was called Voice Inside, a talent development initiative for non-desk staff. It offered language training, mentorship, visibility, opportunities. It was her idea, and it spread faster than anyone expected. Later that quarter, Marla was invited to speak at a logistics summit. She didn't bring slides or a pitch deck, just her story. "I was never just a janitor," she said into the microphone. "I was fluent, I was focused, I was ready, but no one ever looked long enough to see it. So the next time you walk past someone without a title, ask yourself, what brilliance are you missing?" The room went silent, then erupted. On her way out, a young man stopped her, eyes glassy, voice shaking. "My mom's a housekeeper," he said. "Speaks 5 languages. I used to be embarrassed to say that." Marla touched his arm. "Don't ever be ashamed of where you come from. The only shame is in staying blind to brilliance." She left that building taller than she had ever walked, not because of the applause, not because of the title, but because she had changed absolutely nothing about who she was, and finally, the world had caught up.